Hey there everyone. I figured since Monsterlands is on a long hiatus at the moment, I'd try to entertain and inform you with a new video discussing my thought process behind the recent chapters, specifically the chapters in Monsterlands Vol.2. Keep in mind this involves spoilers, so if you haven't read my webcomic yet, I'm gonna recommend you do that. Even if you don't care about spoilers, you should read it anyway, since that context will help you understand what I'm talking about here. Okay, let's get ready. So we start with the chapter focusing on Aaron Laurie. I've already covered this a bit in another video, specifically what it means for Aaron's character, so I'll talk about the chapter in general. The story opens with Aaron executing Wormy as the monster pleads for mercy. It's then followed by amusing hijinks as Aaron tries and fails to kill Othera. And then it ends with Aaron having a depressing meltdown. So this chapter is sad in the beginning, funny in the middle, and sad in the end. I try to make the tone the same at the beginning and end of stories so the reader doesn't get whiplash from sudden tonal shifts. If you aren't careful with the tone, then the reader won't know how to feel and your intentions as an author can become muddled. Tone can vary, but in general you want to have, the beginning should be the main tone that is dominant throughout the story. Kersha and the Necromancer get some fun character moments here. The Necromancer decides to actually put their trust in Kersha, which pays off with her talking Aaron out of killing the both of them. In the past, Kersha has always been kind of a moron, but this scene shows there's definitely more to her and there's a reason she hasn't gotten killed by Aaron so far. She's also perceptive to the fact that there may be more to the Necromancer, when she gets a glimpse of how strong they are after attempting to move Wally. The two of them are seen talking trash about Aaron's naming skills when it comes to her monsters, and mutually agreeing to leave the room when her temper gets out of control, so it's clear they are becoming more friendly towards each other. The montage of Aaron sending monsters to kill Othera is comedic, but it also serves to show that Othera is not just sitting around doing nothing. Her stated goal at the end of Book 1 was to join Nadil's army, so despite being unseen for basically this whole book, the reader can infer that she's journeying around having her own adventures. Near the end of this montage you see Edith's spy owl show up to drop off a letter, and from Aaron's reaction you know this isn't the first time this has happened. A mysterious figure has been sending her threats for a long period of time. You learn more about Edith later on, but from this action it's clear that despite her adversarial nature with Nadil, she is no ally of Aaron's. There's also some foreshadowing with Aaron complaining that it'll take 4 months for her problems to go away. The chapter featuring Emperor Oft and his son opens with Emperor Oft II making his first appearance in the comic. He steps out of his carriage and then cuts off the soldier before he can give him an overly long greeting praising him. Basically, he enjoys the power and status he has, but he doesn't really buy into his own hype. He's certainly no hero, but he doesn't spend every second reveling in acts of villainy either. He's basically just some guy who values efficiency over wanton cruelty, though he will tolerate the cruelty as long as he can continue to enjoy the perks that come with his position. This attitude is illustrated by his reaction to his father using ice magic to kill a bunch of soldiers and freeze over their summer palace. He's not worried that Emperor Oft will turn his abilities on the rest of the continent. He's worried that his family's summer home is now unusable. It's a waste of resources. Speaking of the summer palace, this is the same location that Sally was trapped in when the Destructor came to save her, so I'm setting this up as an important place. There is history here, and there is something special about ice magic from the way the characters in this chapter talk about it, something that sets it apart from other abilities that makes it uniquely dangerous. In the past, Emperor Oft has only been briefly discussed. He only showed up in a single flashback Extras had, where we could see how terribly he treated his adversaries. So how well does he treat those close to him? Well, he sucks in that category too. His line about how his wife isn't allowed to leave him and how he almost kills his son to spite her show him to be a bitter, abusive, controlling person. Even in his moments of weakness, he is dangerous, unsympathetic, and unfixable. So I had these 2 chapters featuring horrible people having moments of vulnerability, and that was to prime the reader for one of the protagonists in the next long chapter. At this point, Marcus was one of the least popular characters in Monsterlands. He lacks the coolness and power of other villains, so it's not like anyone was rooting for this guy. He's also unaligned with any other character, so he comes across as a filler villain. So I was honestly a little worried about this going into the chapter, as I wasn't sure readers would want to stick around to see a character that they despise get some development. So what is this story about? When writing, I always try to focus on what the story is about, and when I say that, I don't mean the details of the plot. I mean the thematic elements that speak to the reader's humanity. This is a series with magic and monsters, but you still have to emotionally relate to what's happening on some level. On that note, what's the theme of this chapter? Well, it's called Filler Story, which, sure, is a joke about how Othera isn't here, but it's also about the idea of people wasting their time doing things that don't help them. While Sally is the main antagonist of the chapter, Nixtos and Edith function as the thematic antagonists of the chapter, as they both believe Nadine is wasting her time with some of her extra heroics and should conform to their idea of what she should be. Marcus has also internalized the idea that he's wasted his life, as shown in his outburst at his younger brother in the middle of the chapter. It's clear he feels that he's missed out on a normal life and has become consumed by bitterness, resulting in his current behavior where all of his duplicitous actions are really just him lashing out at a world he perceives to be uniformly cruel. Sally is somewhat of a foil to Marcus, in that they both appear nice but are actually hiding evil intentions. The main difference is Marcus is actually pretty insightful every now and then and can execute plans on the fly, whereas Sally's deceptions aren't done as well, but she can fall back on her physical strength if her plans fall apart. In her own way, Sally also hammers home the theme of wasting time, but in a more comedic manner. As Marcus points out, she could have just transformed right off the bat to try and kill Nadine, but due to wanting to get laid, her plan ends up having a few holes. The chapter is also about secrets. Nadine, Marcus, Sally, Edith, and Nixtos are all keeping secrets from each other. Since there is only a good amount of action at the end, this helps keep the dialogue-heavy scenes interesting, since the reader will be waiting to see when a conversation turns south and what the fallout from these discoveries will be. The chapter begins with Marcus seeming to be the main villain. He's abrasive to Nadine's soldiers and makes it pretty clear that he intends to betray Nadine once he realizes that Sally has no money to offer as a reward. Now, Marcus has no spectacular powers, so he needs to do some impressive things in order for the reader to take him seriously as a threat. He instantly sees through Sally's disguise once he notices the outline of the Destructor, which has been patched up in the wall. Remember that Marcus has met the Destructor in the first book, so he puts two and two together and realizes that Sally never bothered to escape, added to the fact that she's dressed like, the way she is in the snowy mountains, and it's clear something's off with her. Readers should also notice things are off with the talking door that the Destructor had busted down being repaired when the group arrives at the palace. Marcus tosses Sally out the window, removing the most comedic character. This is useful since his conversation with Alex was probably the darkest scene in Monsterland so far, and having someone be funny during such a serious scene would really undercut it. So out the window you go, Sally. It also sells the fact that at this point in the story, Marcus is the main antagonist. Sally returns later, confirming Marcus's ideas about her, but it's clear in this moment that Marcus really didn't care whether or not she was actually an evil monster. He just acted on a hunch. Once Marcus starts to back off his worst impulses, that's when Sally returns, to keep a threat visible in the story. Our other protagonist in this story is Nadine Analan. Initially seeming like a goofy, heroic person, her conflict with her secretive financial backer, Edith, adds some inner conflict to her character. Nadine's ultimate goal is the defeat of Aaron and Exorus, but she often makes smaller gestures of heroism, such as saving Marcus and going out of her way to try and save Sally when her armies are regrouping. She is seriously considering compromising her actions to be more in line with what Edith wants from her until Marcus thanks her for saving him. Their arcs are intertwined in that they both emerge from the chapter as more hopeful characters despite the challenges they face. As a bonus, they go from being fake friends to real friends, which is nice. Though Nadine does make a point to put Marcus in his place near the end of the chapter, as planning to betray and murder her in the past is definitely not cool. Speaking of betrayal, in Marcus's first appearance, Othera lets him go and he betrays her anyway. The factors that change his actions this time are that his brother is disgusted by him, which makes him more willing to try new things as opposed to continuing on with the same trash. The fact that he overhears Nadil being sincere about saving him does more to assure him than if she'd said such things directly to him. Marcus has an issue with honesty in that he doesn't expect it from others, so being able to drop in on the conversation between Edith and Nadil snapped him out of his path. Nadil and Marcus both have their own reasons they feel they cannot be openly vulnerable, and they relate to each other on that level. Nadil had gotten very little screen time and Marcus was widely hated, but the readers seem to have come around to both of them. I'm glad this happened because if I made a 90-page story titled Filler Story and then readers hated everything, let's just say that would have been a very depressing example of a writing gamble not working out. Right now I have nothing to say about Nixtos revealing that the world will end in 4 months. All I'll say is she probably wasn't a fan of this chapter. And as for Edith, I have even less conclusive things to say about her. She knew of Marcus's true nature but declined to tell Nadil about that at all, seemingly setting her up for a disaster. But when Nadil emerges victorious, Edith isn't at all displeased despite being surprised. It comes across more as her testing Nadil rather than an act of sabotage, at least from her perspective. Also, earlier in the book there are some small world-building bits dropped here and there. From the Emperor Off chapter we are told that ice made from ice magic takes decades to melt. And Sally tells the group that the ice is unbreakable, which is an important detail so you know when all the ice begins to melt, it's not some random occurrence. I'd talk more about ice magic and the significance of it melting, but the comic is still going, so I'm not going to say any more about that. Sally also uses the line "succubi like myself," which implies she was born naturally as a member of a race of monsters, and not created by magic like some of Aaron's other monsters. Nadil muses about how Aaron does nothing to maintain any infrastructure in the Monsterlands, which implies that the continent may be filled with many treacherous structures and reinforces the idea that Aaron is just not a good ruler, and the Monsterlands is a pretty dangerous place. These are small asides thrown out in little character moments, so as not to bog down the story with constant exposition, but over time they add up to slowly give the reader an understanding of how certain things work in this world. Well, that's about all I can think of in terms of breaking down my writing decisions for Monsterlands Vol. 2. I know the hiatus has been real long, but I want to assure you Monsterlands is not dead. As a matter of fact, I'm still working on it behind the scenes. I just want a really good buffer before I return. Pandemic's been pretty stressful, so, sorry. But hopefully this little writing video is something to tide you over. Alright, see you later.